Hello and welcome, friends. Nick Cucci, Executive Director of the Recording Academy here. I hope everyone is healthy and safe. Please make sure also that you're registered to vote in the upcoming November elections. Thank you for joining us for this latest episode of our New York Chapter's Conversation series. This series is about highlighting organizations and individuals making a difference or providing a service for our music community. Today, we feature the Institute for Composer Diversity, hailing from SUNY Fredonia in upstate New York. The Institute for Composer Diversity is committed to the celebration, education, and advocacy of music created by composers from historically underrepresented genders, racial, ethnic, and cultural heritages, sexual orientations, and disabled composers. We are joined today by the Institute's director, Rob Deemer, a composer himself, as well as conductor and educator, as well as their Wind Band Database co-coordinator, Erik Leung, and Institute advisor and composer, Alex Shapiro. Please join me in welcoming Rob, Erik, and Alex. Rob, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Nick, for including us in your series here, and welcome to all of the New York members of the Recording Academy. I appreciate your time, and hopefully you'll get to learn a little bit about our new project that we've been working on. So, as Nick mentioned, I'm Dr. Rob Deemer. I'm the director and founder of the Institute for Composer Diversity. I also teach composition out here in Western New York at the State University of New York at Fredonia. And what I'm going to do first is just to give you a little background in terms of how this came about, and then I will include my colleagues, Alex and Erik, to have them tell you a little bit about why this project is needed. So the background of this is basically I started a small spreadsheet for my students here at Fredonia, just so they could learn about women composers. I've always thought it was important for them to be able to learn about living composers, and over time, this was about 4 years ago, it was really evident that they needed to know more composers who were not guys. And so basically I started a small spreadsheet. I included it in, or at least the list that I had put together in an article that I wrote for New Music Box online through the New Music USA. And that article basically came up with about 400 more names than the 200 that I had originally come up with. Long story short, I started a list. It started about 200 names. Fast forward about a year and a half, so we're almost at the end of 2017, and I had a working spreadsheet of almost 3,000 women composers. As I did that, through that process, I came up with the idea that, well, for one thing, it was much bigger than for my own students here at Fredonia, but also the idea that a list with just hyperlinks to websites isn't very useful. It's kind of like searching for a needle in a haystack, or through many haystacks. If you're looking for an orchestra piece or a choral piece or a piece for solo clarinet, it's kind of hard to be able to do that with just a list of names with their websites. So basically what I did was I started to come up with other search parameters that folks could then be able to search. Added that to the mix. Throughout 2018, we included composers from underrepresented heritages as well, and started a website, Composerdiversitycom. And over time, we were able to get the university here in Fredonia to allow for us to be able to affiliate with them. So we created what was just a project, is now the Institute for Composer Diversity. And I'm so lucky to be able to have so many folks to be able to help me with many of the projects that we deal with, including being able to have a composer diversity database that has almost 4,500 names in it at this point. We also have a works database that has, I think, close to 15,000 works for wind band, for orchestra, and for art song. And we're currently building a chamber music database, and a choral database, and there will be other databases down the road for recordings and opera and jazz and other, hopefully, film music as well. So it's going to be quite expansive and as comprehensive as we can make it. In addition to that, we also are doing a fair amount of analysis, because it's great to have these resources, but we also have to be perfectly honest, we have to talk folks into being able to use them, and we'll talk about why in a sec. But one of the ways that we're doing this is to convince folks to be able to use these resources is by analyzing seasons. And we started with orchestras, and so last year we looked at 120 orchestra seasons, all of their programs, and kind of just put that out there on our website, and a bunch of orchestras noticed, and we got a fair amount of conversation out of it. And this year we're doing the same thing. We're looking at both the intended seasons that orchestras were planning to do, but then obviously with the pandemic, they had to change their tack. Some of them aren't performing at all this year, but many of them are performing, and we're actually seeing a huge increase in performing works by composers from underrepresented heritages, which sounds a little strange, by the way. It's a term that we use instead of composers of color, just because we bring folks in from both racial, ethnic, and cultural heritages outside of the traditional Western European folks. So that's why I'm using that term. But in addition to orchestras, we're also looking at wind bands, and hopefully we're going to be using choral as well in the future. So those are just a few of those resources. We'll get into more of them in detail in a bit, but I wanted to ask both Alex Shapiro and Erik Leung if you can give the members some ideas of why is this project needed, and what brought you into this? What convinced you to take part?
Well, I guess Alex, ladies first, right? So
no, you go ahead, Erik. I'm gonna be the caboose here.
Well, I think for me, as a conductor, I had a lot of training in the canon, in the Western classical canon. For wind band, that's our Stravinsky's, it's Mozart, it's Holst, it's Vaughan Williams, and becoming intimately familiar with these composers, you quickly realize that the wind band canon isn't as deep as, say, the orchestral canon or even the choral literature, that spans so many hundreds of years. And so I think there's a certain amount of freedom for us as wind band conductors and educators to broaden the scope of our canon. And that's where I really come in. And I think about every day that we as wind band conductors get to push the boundaries, of the kinds of music, the kinds of composers. And I think with that comes this embrace of diversity, of inclusion, and also of equity. And for us, it's finding composers like Alex, finding composers like Erik Leung, or even new composers that are coming out right now. And so for me, it's that exciting nature of discovering, new music by new composers that have different points of view, than our standard canon. And I think that's, for me, is so exciting. What brought me, to the ICD in the first place.
And the database that Rob and others have, contributed to help build, which is truly enormous and growing, is an amazing tool to point people to when they're interested in expanding the scope of their repertoire. Let's say if they're a conductor, or let's say if they're a film director and looking, whatever they want to do. It helps to be able to point people to places where they can then explore and discover these voices that they wouldn't otherwise know. Really, the way I see it, I'm a composer who, a lot of you, since you're with the Recording Academy, you're not necessarily as familiar with the wind band world, for instance, or even the concert music world, as you might be with film and TV and media composing, which I used to do many years ago. But I might interests right now have been pointed very much toward the wind band world, which, as Erik so beautifully put, is quite open and quite excited to living composers, new music, new people, new faces. But then the question is, how do those new faces and new people become known quantities to the conductors and the ensemble directors? And then also, how do we raise the awareness of the ensemble directors to all the composers out there? The database, the ICD database, is definitely one of those major tools. And I want to point something out because it's useful to everybody's thinking. Rob, as an individual, Rob is a wonderful composer, and as an individual, a few years ago, he just decided to start this. And you know what, about a year after he did that, unrelated really to what he was doing, but just of the same ilk, I decided to do a much simpler project, which is much more of an overview. But about 3 years ago, I created a programming resources webpage off of my own webpage, which is a set of aggregated links where you can find all kinds of composers from all kinds of backgrounds, plus a smattering of my own thoughts on this matter, etc., all helpful from the perspectives of if you're a director, how can you open your mind to thinking about possibilities that maybe don't look like you? And then if you are wanting to become involved as an artist into the professional world, how do you do that? And if you are an established artist in that world, how do you reach out and identify the talent that you see around you and bring them into the fold? Very important. So my point here is that every one of us can do something on our own time even to raise awareness and create opportunity for others. It's quite exciting, and it's never been easier to do.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And I will kind of tack on to that one of the things that I've discovered in this adventure that I find myself in now for the last 4 years or so, has been, when I first started it, I had no idea that it was going to be doing what it's doing and have the impact that it has had. And so over time, I've kind of learned and thought about, like, well, why is this important? At first, I thought it was always is obvious. We need to find more of these composers. I'd heard a lot of conductors say they'd love to be able to program more works by women composers back when I was just focusing on that. But the fact that they didn't even know who they were or where to find them, that was one of the things that was keeping from them. As we've gone through the last 4 years, and especially this last year or so, it has become more and more evident that while it's great to be able to connect conductors with composers, let's say, and performers with composers, and let classical radio music hosts find recordings by composers that they may not have ever heard of before. That's not the biggest impact that this is having. What I'm hoping, and it may take a few years for this to happen, but I feel very strongly that I think ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is we're hopefully going to be able to have an impact on basically the entire world at some point in some form or fashion, because the more people, at least the people who are going to concerts, that are hearing music on the radio, that are playing music in a classroom when they're kids, or they're going to hear their kids play music in a concert, it's really important for all of those folks, the audience members, the students, to be able to hear voices from people who are like them. And if all of those ways that people hear music, either through a live concert or through recordings, or on any of the internet modalities that they can find, if all of the music that they're hearing is just from white guys, and actually a fair amount of it is dead white guys, but at least white men like myself, that's a fairly limited lens through which they can hear it. And as a composer myself, I think it's also really important for students to be able to hear music and to play music and to sing music from people who are like them. So if you have someone who is, say, I don't know, a black female student in high school, and they never had the idea of composing. And then they go to choir, or let's say they're playing viola in an orchestra, and suddenly they get to play a piece by Jesse Montgomery or Courtney Bryan, and suddenly they're getting a chance to play music by people who are just like them. That not only is potentially going to inspire them maybe to compose themselves, but if nothing else, it gives them a much broader sense of the world and what they could do in it. So I just wanted to go into that a little bit because I think it's important. I'm hoping that we're helping the composers out that take part in our resources, and I'm sure it's helping the folks who are programming and performing these works, but it's really the audiences and the students who are performing the works when they're kids all the way through college, that it's also really important.
And Rob, is it okay if I just jump in? Because
in.
I love that point. That is so cool. And like when you talk about this, it just brings back the memories, being, a child of immigrants from China, like it was a long time, where I just didn't see music by other Chinese composers. And the more that I, teach at the post-secondary level and program and even talk about programming with other teachers, I really feel like the diversity in our classrooms need to reflect the diversity of programming, and I love that little idea that, we can, through our programming, we reflect what we see in our world today. I'm Canadian, and Canada is a mosaic. And so we have a lot of different cultures, and here in America, there's a lot of different cultures. And it's about time that we start representing, all of the gamut of people.
Well, keep going, Alice.
I was just going to jump in and say, I bet that a number of people watching this may not be aware of what the percentages are of all the music that you guys hear in concerts, in film, in TV. If I am being generous in my assessment, in terms of all the music you're hearing, maybe 7% of it is written by people of color and women. Maybe, and that's probably a really high number. So there's work to be done. And in 2020 and beyond, there's never been a reason for this, but now there really is no excuse for it. And, for those of you in media arts, the Alliance of Women Film Composers, which was formed a few years ago out in Los Angeles. Go to their website, afwc.com, and see what they're doing to elevate the presence of women in the industry, incredible women composers, film score and media composers. There are so many people writing wonderful music, and I think it's just a matter, as I said earlier, of making people aware of it. And that means raising it in conversation with your peers and with people you work with, not in a hostile or attacking way. Most people, let's say if you're talking to conductors who you happen to know don't seem to have very much diverse programming and what they're doing, you know why? Most people are not naturally, intentionally discriminatory. They're not. They're very good people. It just doesn't occur to them that, they're swimming in water, so to speak, that's the same temperature as they are, and it just doesn't occur to them to think differently, to look at their program and analyze and realize, oh my gosh, every single composer on my concert, or every single composer I've ever hired to score, one of my documentaries or whatever, is a white guy. And it doesn't occur to them. Yeah. So when you bring it to someone's attention, it's wonderful, and point them to resources like what the ICD has. It's wonderful. It solves the problem, and it is being solved exponentially. I guarantee you, in a few years, we're going to see a great big change in all of this.
Well, and it's a wonderful springboard to talk a little bit about the resources that we have. The databases, like I said, the two big databases, which are kind of the foundation of the whole thing. You can search for using the Composer database. You can search by whether or not someone is living or dead, because sometimes folks are looking for music, say from the 19th century or the 18th century, and so they want to be able to search for composers within those different guidelines, or looking for living composers because they want to be able to invite the composer to the concert. So that's a useful thing. You can search by gender, and that includes women, men, non-binary, and then also we have an LGBTQ plus component as well, because there are a lot of students. One of the reasons why we added that is there are a lot of students who say are in high school, who are in college, that are just discovering their own identities within those communities. And the ability for them to be able to find others who are like them, who are composers, may be really useful for folks who are either composers themselves or musicians who want to be able to connect with music from folks who are from those communities. So those were really important. We also have, as I mentioned, a number of racial, ethnic, and cultural heritages, the demographics that you can search for. And we've tried to keep that as fairly diverse as we can. So folks can look for Latinx or South Asian or Southeast Asian, West Asian, North African composers. It really just depends. All it does really to be able to look for a Black composer or an African composer or both is to take this large list of 4,500 composers that we have that's growing every day, and to be able to bring it down a little bit, because we don't have the time to be able to go through thousands or hundreds of names. But if you're looking for composers who happen to be living and Black and have written a string quartet, you can click 3 boxes and you'll find at least who the different names are. It'll allow for you to be able to find out not only where they live. By the way, those are also searchable, so you can search for folks in your own city, your own state, your own country, if you're either here in the States or international. And it allows for you to be able to connect with them through their websites. The works database is very similar, but it also allows it's allowing you to be able to search for different works through like I said, we've got primarily wind band, orchestra, and art song now. This will grow over the next few years. And it's great because you can look by difficulty level, especially if you're in K-12 or higher education. It's good to know that. But a duration, if you're looking for a specific kind of piece, say a concerto, you can look for something like that. If it includes electronic music, like a lot of Alex Shapiro's band works, you can click that box and you're able to find the works much more easily than you would just hunting and pecking through websites. After that, we've got our analysis page. As I mentioned, we've analyzed last year's orchestra seasons, and there will be a lot more on that side coming up. Other resources that we have, we've got a bibliography with a bunch of different books and articles that deal with basically diversity in all of these different spaces. And one of the other things that we do that I think is really important is it may sound kind of very detailed, but within the K-12 music education system, each state has their own required state band list or state repertoire list that allows teachers to be able to find works by for band or for orchestra or chamber works or choir or whatnot. It's really important that folks are able to find works by underrepresented composers, because usually those repertoire lists are, Alex mentioned 7%. It's usually more like 2% for those. And it's really important because these music educators are very limited in terms of how they're able to get that music. And if we're able to diversify those state repertoire lists, that opens up both from just allowing teachers to be able to find the music that they want, but also it allows distributors like J.W. Pepper and Stanton's and others across the country to be able to include those works on their catalogs. So those are just a few of the resources.
And I'll jump in on that and say that, many composers now, the living ones, are self-publishing. So when their music is shut out of the lists, when it's not included, it means they're at a financial disadvantage, an economic disadvantage. They're not competing on equal footing for no reason at all, because those pieces are just as good as the other stuff that you'll see on the lists. I mean, excellence is excellence. And so that's why it's very important along the lines, again, in education. think to yourselves, how many times have you seen female or Black or Latino composers represented in textbooks? Not many, if at all. I don't think when I was coming up I ever read about one. And being able to be part of the fabric of our society on every level, from the beginning up, from educating kindergartners on up, is such an important aspect of equity in the arts.
And I think, like, to kind of piggyback off of that from a conductor standpoint, the exciting thing about the band field is that, when we have a piece, it's going to get performed a number of times. You're not going to have one piece that's performed and then we're going to forget about it. So there's this kind of continuity, in the wind band field. And so, when we talk to our friends, we have a great piece that by this composer no one's ever heard of, you should play this piece. And so there's a lot more longevity that I found, especially with young composers, with up and coming composers in our field, because everyone, again, just like myself, is hungry for new music. And we want to be able to program music by composers that don't look like us, that maybe don't have the same experiences as us. And I think that's a really exciting thing, from that educational standpoint, for composers, that there's a longevity, for the pieces.
So Erik, I'm going to throw a question back to you and then Alex, and then I think we'll have just enough time to close up. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how you have seen your colleagues, both in the band world, but also in other areas of music. How are they implementing not just our resources, but just kind of more broadly? How are they implementing this idea of diversifying repertoire into their planning, whether it be on the concert hall stage or in their curriculum or just in normal life?
That's a great question. I think I'll just say from the very first part of it is that I don't know everything. And I'm coming from a place that my partner has called cultural humility. I just don't know everything, and I'm willing to learn and grow. And so for myself, that's learning about diversity, inclusion, equity. At least here at Oregon State, we have committed to programming a piece by underrepresented composer for every one of our concerts from here on out. So we've done that as a commitment. We've also gone towards more of gender neutral attire, for our women and our men, so that, we don't have uniforms that are gendered, and so there's a lot of really important things. And every day I'm discovering more and more, about how to be a better human, how to be, more inclusive, how to be more equitable. But it really does come back to that idea of, like, cultural humility. And I think that's the one thing that I would say that my friends here in the wind band, we really try and practice that. We don't know all the answers, but we're willing to find them, and we're willing to ask, if we don't know.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Alex?
One thing I've observed is that what Erik said about what they're doing at Oregon State University is increasingly common, not only in universities, but in conferences. For example, in the wind band world, some of you know about the Midwest Clinic, and last year they decided to put in place the same rule that every concert, and there are many, every performance should include at least one underrepresented composer, because they know that that's how you're going to start the trend. Because it becomes exponential, because then everybody hears that music, it gets purchased and performed many, many times, and then those composers bring other composers that are like them into the field, etc. And it's this happy, rolling snowball of diversity. Another thing I just want to wrap up with to say that everybody can do, and we love seeing this, is on social media. On Facebook or Twitter or whatever. Sometimes if someone is looking for a certain kind of music by a certain kind of person and they don't know where to start, they throw out that question on social media, and the number of responses on the threads are fantastic. And guess what happens? Not only do they get all these new resources, but we all learn from it. And then that circles right back into these databases and links and other things. So it's all connective. It's all about sharing information and bringing everybody in to the fold.
Mm-hmm.
That's a perfect place to end. This is just the beginning of being able to access as much information as we can to find really good music by composers that a lot of folks just haven't heard of before. And up until now, we haven't been able to find them. But this, hopefully, this project that we've come up with and we're continuing to do makes that job a little bit easier. Nick, I just wanted to thank you again for including us on our series. And on behalf of Erik and Alex and myself and the entire ICD team, thank you for having us.